So of course, then we bring the lens back to why trauma-informed coaching. Now, discussing why trauma-informed coaching, I would like to bring to your attention WHO, World Health Organization, in 2024, I think September, they just updated the PTSD fact sheet. And when they did, what we found out is this number, the 70% of the global population is estimated to having had a potential traumatic event in their life continues on. I have checked in 2019 and once again somewhere in the early 2020s and checked again recently when the update came through, and this number remains constant. So 70% of the global population potentially having had a traumatic experience. Now, this is what we can estimate. Now, if we go beyond what we can't estimate, let me give you two examples. One is how some of us say that we don't want to involve with trauma. I don't want to hear about trauma. I don't want to learn about trauma. When we do that, it can be some type of freezing, some type of, it's actually a trauma response, which we will come to learn in the future as we continue these sessions. We freeze from often those traumatic memories. It's like some kind of an amnesia. We don't want to deal with them because it's too painful for us sometimes. And sometimes we genuinely don't remember. So this estimate did not include those who forgot their traumatic experiences, those who froze their psychological, emotional processes, as well as their neurological processes. Therefore, they do not even remember that something of that traumatic happened to them. Here's another type of things that we don't remember. Do you know how traumatic it can be a childbirth? Of course, a childbirth is very traumatic to a mother. But have you ever thought about how traumatic it would be to a child? And how many children, how many of you would remember, oh, my childbirth was very traumatic? Not really many, unless parents told them, unless they had complications that are followed through certain experiences. So we know that this 70% potentially doesn't include majority of those children, those who had traumatic childbirth, for an example. Just to give you two examples. And why am I going on talking about this 70% and more? Is because those are our clients. Those clients who come to you, maybe not within this 70, maybe they absolutely don't even know where their life changed, how traumatic experiences influence them. And they may not have that direct awareness to tell you as the coach, oh, I had this traumatic, it might not even occur to them. So in other words, if you are a practicing professional coach, or for that matter, any other professional human being, even it doesn't need to be your clients, maybe people at the supermarket, maybe your neighbor, maybe your best friend, have had traumatic experiences. They might not even know about them. They might not even relate the current challenges that they're experiencing, like running away from the person who seemed to love them the most, is actually a result of something that happened to them as a child. And this becomes very problematic in traditional coaching, don't you think? Now, for an example, if you look at the two most prominent coach accreditation, if not coach credential providers, ICF, EMCC, International Coaching Federation, European Mentoring and Coaching Council. The definition of coaching clearly creates a boundary for all of us as professional coaches. The coaching framework within traditional coaching frameworks indicates very clearly the operations of the coach is limited to present to the future. Present, so here and now to the future. We meet the client where they are, and then we enable them to lead into their goals, achievements, transformation. And you notice in this equation, coaching completely closed the door to the past. Primarily past and primarily emotional past, which means if you ask a few questions about the client past, if you ask a few questions about the client's past emotions, you are not violating any boundary. Do not worry about that. What I mean here is that using ICF language, if you are operating with the client primarily in the past, primarily in the client's emotional past, then we are crossing a boundary. According to ICF calls this the therapeutic space. So that would mean if we primarily operate in client's past and emotional past, we will be crossing a boundary. And that becomes even more problematic when we look at some of the marketing that is out there by coaches. I deliver holistic coaching. I deliver integrative coaching. But let's take a step back. How can we be integrative if we cannot consider client's past, client's emotions? Because now we know that trauma, which has happened in the past, is integral to human experience. The adversities, challenging experiences informs us today who we are. All our behavior, emotions, feelings, our internal processes, they are led by our past. So if we are only operating within ICF definition of coaching and we identify ourselves as holistic, it is not an accurate statement. If we said we are an integrative professional coach, it is not an accurate sentence. I hope it is becoming clearer. So let's take an example. Now, why, apart from my initial sharing with you, why I'm passionate about trauma and why I created this comprehensive trauma-informed coaching framework, as you are aware, I work with other coaches, professional coaches, helping them to sharpen their skill to become legendary professional coaches. So I very compassionately listen to some of the coaching recordings, difficulties, challenges other professional coaches face in the role of a mentor and a supervisor. And as I do that, I listen to many coaching recordings. I hear many stories about coaching. For an example, there are several coaches out there who coach situations around procrastination and burnout. Have you ever come across a client like that? You might not identify yourself as a coach who provide support to clients who have procrastination or burnout. It may be one of your executive coaching clients. It may be one of your student clients. It may be some other clients, maybe a business owner. You may have noticed time to time, people tend to have these difficult moments, not being able to move forward. And they often identify themselves with the word procrastination and burnout. Now, let's be mindful. Not all burnout and procrastination is necessarily trauma. It can also be an acute situation, acute stress, maybe, acute fear, and they do not want to move forward for some reason. That doesn't necessarily need to be fully influenced by trauma. But interestingly, however, severe cases, chronic cases of procrastination and burnout may revolve from traumatic experiences. So when a client comes to the coach and say, I have procrastination, I'm experiencing burnout, can you please help me? So the coach might think, yeah, let's strategize. Let's help the client to strategize. Let's break things down. Let's enable the client to come up with a strong plan of actions. And let's provide the client with strong accountability and help them move forward with their goal. And it will be easy peasy. We might think like that. And maybe someone who is not a coach might think this procrastination and burnout is a weakness. It's laziness. They don't know how to strategize. Maybe people will judge like that as well. There may be some truth to all of these things that we are saying. There may be a client that you can help to strategize, take actions, and become accountable so that they can pass through that phase. But there will be other people, actually, the majority of them. What if they were in a long-term survival state? Not about not being able to strategize, take actions, or be accountable. What if they were in a state of long-term survival? Let's say if you were faced with the client who says, I'm lazy. I can't strategize. I can't take actions. Can you help me? Yes, you can. Client might not know this, but the client might find out this through the coaching process. Great. Client is agreeing to all this. So therefore, you can support the client in that case. But how about through the coaching conversation, you came across something like this? There's this client, seem motivated, want to achieve it so badly, and that's the thing that they want the most, so badly want something. But that's exactly the same thing that they are not doing. Instead, they are binge watching TV, they are scrolling their phone feed, social media feed. They are not really able to break that cycle, almost like they are stuck in a survival state. And you have enabled them to create actions, accountability. They went first week, came back with nothing. Second week, came back with nothing. Third session, fourth session, you see this pattern. So it's becoming clear to us that there's something else. What if this something else is long-term survival state? Now, how would you help this client? How would you continue to coach this client? What would you do with the client to begin with? Now, interestingly, in this kind of situations, if we try to strategize, take actions and accountability, we are literally re-traumatizing the client. What do we mean by that? The client is afraid of that task and we are pushing the client towards the task. It's almost like there's danger, like let's say there's um, a lion in front of us, furious, and we push our client towards the lion. And we make it even worse for the client when we set actions, accountability. When they fail, they develop guilt, they develop shame, and they become even more afraid of or even more fearful of that specific task. They start to perceive that even worse as an even worse threat. Now, what is really happening in this case? Often, when we look at this kind of survival threat in showing up as procrastination and burnout, it's a fear of exposure, being caught unguarded, and not knowing the consequences, anticipated shame or criticism. I think we don't have to go really far into our client stories, even ourselves. If you come to think of it, some of you are still considering creating your website. Some of you are still considering doing that meeting, calling that company, opening your practice, renting an office, or creating content. We are still struggling. Why? It's because we are afraid of criticism, failure, and that creates this shame and guilt within us. And it also can be related to perfectionism. And also, perfectionism all can also be connected to our safety and worth, for an example. And if you grew up with a family, especially primary caregivers, who were perfectionists, if not expected perfectionism from you, and that created interesting alignment in how you feel safe. If our parents expected too much from us, when we were not able to achieve what they expected. We didn't feel safe to go to them. And when we didn't feel safe to go to them, we devalued our worth, self-worth. So when we say anticipated shame, criticism, exposure, it didn't just pop up because we became a coach. It didn't pop up because our client has a new project. It's because there are things that have happened to us, sometimes prolonged, sometimes once, sometimes several times, sometimes we didn't even notice. Maybe it's the teacher, maybe it's the parent. So therefore, we have been molded into someone that behaves in a specific way based on our past experiences. And even when this kind of thing happens, people often lose agency in life because that they do not have the courage to lift them up. And often it's not even about the courage, it's really about what is dictated within themselves, and it is often unconscious. The reason why we are going into this kind of binge watching and scrolling through our feed tend to be because we freeze from actually. Very often, I think there's a misunderstanding that we think it's disassociation. I think it's accurate to say disassociation, but as a psychotherapist from a clinical lens, often more than disassociation is the freeze that shows up in procrastination and burnout. So it's not laziness. It's not that they can do it. It's just that they perceive it as a threat. So it's chronic stress, neglect, threat that they're experiencing in that moment. And it feels automatic. It feels bodily. Even ourselves, sometimes we have had that moment of binge watching TV. We knew what we needed to do, the most important thing, but we just did the opposite. And it didn't feel like something that came from our mind. At one moment, we were thinking about it. The other moment, we have watched 12 hours of Netflix. So it's not really a cognitive thing. Let me now not do this work. Instead, let me go watch my favorite TV series. We don't do that. It's not conscious very often. We catch ourselves doing that all of a sudden. And it's not that different from being in toxic relationships. It's not that different from being addicted to smoking cigarettes or alcohol or substance abuse, different substances, or sex addiction for that matter, or self-harming ourselves. In fact, all dependencies are self-harming uh, possibilities. So when we deviate from not doing something like procrastination or burnout, it's not because we didn't have the time, we are tired, that we are not doing it. It's because we perceived danger in this situation. It's not something you thought, oh, doing homework, making that video is dangerous, calling that company is dangerous, your client wanting to submit their thesis is dangerous. No, this is the voice of the internal intelligence, which we talked about earlier. Beyond our cognitive thinking intelligence, we also have this deeper intelligence within ourselves, the unconscious intelligence. That unconscious intelligence, which doesn't have direct words, but only a way of showing up through us, experience a threat, which is from the past. So, if you are a professional coach who is working with procrastination and burnout, first we will have to find out what is this burnout about. Is it truly coming from from the past as perceived threat or danger, or is it some acute situation? Now, many of you would find it difficult to figure out why. Which tool would you use? How would you know? There, being trauma informed becomes important. Why? When you're trauma informed, you're able to recognize where it's coming from. You don't have to only very in a controlled, limited way operate here and now to the future. We also can go back with the client. That's what enables trauma. Without crossing a therapeutic boundary, we are able to operate. We are able to find information about the client's past. We are able to understand client's emotion from the past. We may not be able to work with the client because it is related to past. We might not have the right tools to work in this case. Therefore, we may be able to refer the client. It's so much better referring the client to a psychotherapist rather than trying to re-traumatize the client. Now, procrastination and burnout are obvious, very obvious examples. But the interesting thing is that it goes just so way beyond, so way beyond. Just very quick example. A client is celebrating their success, and I'm asking the client, how would you like to celebrate this success, having achieved this goal you set for yourself? I would like to travel. All right. Would you like to tell me more about it? I must ask my partner. Must ask my partner. You become curious. Why must ask partner? So tell me more about this must. Because I need to find the right time. Because I need to make sure my partner is in the right moment. I want to make sure that my partner is prepared to hear this news. Then I become, if you look at different psychological connotations, you know that the Eric Burns, the ego states, the adult state, child state, and then um, the parent state. So when the client says, I want to ask my partner, I had to be in the right moment. All of that you're hearing, this is not an adult talking, neither a parent. Sounds more like a child. Sounds more like a child. And then when I ask further about this, what's happening within the incorporation of trauma-informed coaching, what I find out is that this sensation they are feeling about asking their partner about going on a trip to celebrate resonates with how their parents how they behaved around the parents. She recalls being tiptoeing. She remembers being on eggshells as a child. And she models that exact behavior in her current romantic relationship. And she has no clue that she's operating in the child role, which is an extension of her childhood with their parents. So we can imagine the parents must have been very expecting. They must have been very, in a way, strict with her, maybe perfectionists. And maybe she felt shame, guilt. Maybe they penalized her when she was not able to meet the expectations. So, cut the story short, the more we explored that, something this client found out is that this partner with this partner she has currently, she does not need to be on eggshells. Partner is very loving, accepting, kind, care, and acts as an adult, invites her to be an adult as well. But she wasn't aware. She was remodeling her younger self's behavior as an adult, taking the role of the child. So, because I paid careful attention to, I must ask my partner before deciding how to celebrate, invited her to explore the past without crossing any clinical boundaries. She was able to raise herself into adult self and to create a new reality within her relationship, a much healthier relationship as an adult. The stories can go on. So the more and more and more I listen to this kind of coaching recordings, the more and more I became convinced that we cannot just rigidly say because past emotion is related to trauma and maybe that's related to psychotherapy, we can't address that. That is, I think, in my opinion, being overly cautious. Not knowing something doesn't justify that we do the right thing. Rather, when we don't know of client's past, we are operating with the client wearing a blindfold. That can be even more dangerous for our clients rather than really supporting the client. It can be counterproductive in what we are trying to work with our clients. So therefore, I was in a very big dilemma 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago now, actually. As you are aware, at Ignite Global, we offer trauma-informed, comprehensive, trauma-informed coach practitioner program, which extends to advanced practitioner program. So as I started creating this fully ICF accredited program, I started to look around where else, where is the literature? Where is there a coaching competency framework that I could use comprehensively in creating this uh, accredited program? I mean, to before being accredited, as I was creating the foundation for the program. And one of the very first thing I came to understand is that there's several psychotherapeutic frameworks relating to trauma or addressing trauma directly. But I could clearly see that those frameworks cannot be applied in coaching environments because it is way too deep into psychotherapeutic care, which is definitely crossing a boundary. So I started looking at many other literature. I saw there were there were few other trauma-informed coach education programs. So I reached out, I collected the information, I tried to see if they're using a comprehensive framework. And what I found out was most programs educated coaches about trauma. Most frameworks provided some tools, some techniques for acute regulation. But I didn't see a comprehensive trauma-informed coaching competency. And I thought that's even more dangerous. We are operating within a framework that can very easily cross a boundary into clinical realities, which can even become legal problem. I mean, first of all, it could harm our clients. Second of all, it could harm you. It can even become part of a legal situation. Therefore, usually when I see that there's a gap, my nature is to find a way to fill that gap. So I thought 2.5 years ago, as I was undertaking one of the master's degrees in psychology that I completed some time ago, I decided I am going to, as my academic thesis, as my research, I will develop a universal competency framework for trauma-informed coaching. My specialization was anyway trauma-related, so it was perfectly fitting in. And as you're aware, coaching framework is very similar to humanistic therapeutic framework, client-led, client-directed therapeutic framework. Therefore, I was able to seamlessly merge them together. First, I did a comprehensive research on existing literature to find out if there was any comprehensive framework for coaching. And over again, I was proved that there is no such thing. Therefore, I decided, let's become the pioneer. Let's bring this beautiful framework to our coaches, because it's absolutely important that we do not work with our clients while our eyes are blinded. So I completed this research in June 2025, and it was peer reviewed, it was assessed, and there was a defense of the thesis, and it was, I'm humbled to say that was very well received. And currently I'm choosing with which journal I am publishing this. I've been very occupied. I'm still going through the process of publishing this. So that's why you do not have access to this study yet. But certainly you will have the access to this CTICC framework after this call. I will send you the abstract. I will send you the competency framework itself, not the entire study. The entire study will be available to all of you and to the world once I have published it with one of the scientific journals. So this is how comprehensive trauma-informed coaching competency, CTICC framework came to be. I also didn't want to just introduce just a Word document to the world, because then there is no credibility. Then there is no really strong grounding. We as professional coaches, it's very important we have the right academic grounding, the evidence-based background, the ethical framework. When we engage working with another person's mind, it's working with another person's life. It's very important. Therefore, I thought I would undertake a 2 years research study so that I could create something that is clinically aware as a psychology degree, and then it is ethically sound, and at the same time, it is comprehensive in a way that any organization, be it ICF, be it EMCC, be it you, can embrace it, because it is not just a piece of document, something that I use ChatGPT or just typed out of my mind. It's an outcome of a research that is peer reviewed and gone through the rigorous process of academic literature before it is presented here. All right. So when I created the CTICC framework, we still have 10 minutes. All right. So CTICC framework, so comprehensive trauma-informed coaching competency framework. I thought, how do we align it the best way? I thought it's the best way to align it with another international standard. So what I did was I took ICF core competency framework and I looked at the 8 core competency. And then I looked at the trauma literature. There were books and books and books everywhere here, reading and PDF file after PDF file, and listening to coaching recordings one after the other, and recognizing traumatic situations and where the coaches may have been unaware of what was going on. So after all that, what I did was I compared all this trauma-related competency with ICF framework and came up with this same way how ICF introduced team coaching competency. Core competency, elevated set of competency as team coaching. So just literally that they use this puzzle pieces. So I did the same thing. So I took competency number 1, demonstrates ethical practice, and I added the trauma competency. So it doesn't again repeat the ICF core competency. I looked at where is the gap. So I created demonstrates ethical practice as a trauma-informed reflective practitioner. Because this framework not only can just be used by coaches, this could be used by psychotherapists. This could be especially used by humanist psychotherapists who uses humanistic approach. This could be used by educators. This can be used by healers. This could be used by counselors. So I decided to introduce as a framework for reflective practitioners while grounded as a coaching competency framework. Because in any, whether you are a psychotherapist, educator, counselor, we always can use a coaching approach. So it gels really well. So you notice the extension. Coaching mindset, embodied trauma informed coaching mindset. Establishes, maintains agreements in a trauma informed way. Cultivate trust and safety in a trauma sensitive way. Maintain a presence in a trauma sensitive way. Observe trauma responses, listening actively. While we are listening to trauma, what client is saying, we listen to trauma responses client is handing over to us without their awareness. If we were not aware, we also don't recognize them. So I often say, when you are a traditional professional coach, if your size of the ears is this size, once you go through understanding of trauma-informed coaching competencies, experience them, learn them, your ears grow like like elephants because you hear much more than you never heard before. And many professionals, coaches who go through this program, they see a lot about themselves that they never saw about themselves, their family, their relationships, their partner, their children. They start to change as they go through this learning curve. The inquiry, powerful questions, I say, of course, right? It listens actively. Now, this is done, evoking awareness is done with trauma-informed inquiry. So finally, we integrate insight for post-traumatic growth and facilitate client healing beyond client growth. Because if you're working with a client who is, let's say, who is experiencing procrastination and burnout, instead of actually strategizing a plan of action, we release them the burden of planning. We release them the burden of having to have accountability because that's not what is needed there. What is needed is acceptance in that moment that they are perceiving a threat that doesn't exist, which existed in the past. They are still afraid of a ghost from the past, a ghost that is not even visible at the moment. So the post-traumatic growth is very important. And the post-traumatic growth always doesn't, not always means actions, accountability, accomplishments. The accomplishment is to acceptance, can be acceptance. And there's an additional layer to that ICF competency is not related in terms of trauma-informed competency, which is having a foundational knowledge of trauma and trauma-related disorders, psychological theories, understanding in a deeper layer, like I mentioned earlier. Now, since you are a little bit aware of the attachment styles, attachment types, you have a bit more understanding about how trauma can show up in our relationships. Because we talk about the three ego states in this session today, parent, adult, and the child, you're a little bit more aware about how these roles can show up in adult life as a result of traumatic experiences. So there you are. The ninth competency is a little bit different. Now, I think we have still 5 minutes, so I'm going to quickly walk you through causes of trauma, which we will elaborate in the next session. Trauma usually can be divided into two main categories. One is too much, too fast, too soon. Too much, too fast, too soon, which we call what we know commonly the overwhelm. Meeting with an accident, being assaulted, sexually abused. These are too much, too fast. Too much, in this case, too much pain. Too fast is during the developmental stages, something happened to us. For an example, a child was exposed to sexual content, context, abuse, happening too fast, not the right time, too soon. It's happening too soon. The accident happened so too soon. We couldn't process, we froze. Like deer at the headlight, for an example. Human beings also have that. The startle response. Sometimes When there's specific presence, like an authority presence, we can't process clearly, startle response. Because it's happening too soon with this authority figure, our nervous system can process the overwhelm. And the other side, not enough for too long. Remember, not enough earlier we discussed primary caregiver, nurturing, caring, not enough caring. That those children we saw in that experiment. And it unfortunately happened for too long. It was elongated, so it became chronic, it became traumatic. So, not only what happens to us can be traumatic, but also what doesn't happen to us but required to happen also could be traumatic. In this case, we call it deprivation. So, there's overwhelming trauma and then there's deprivation trauma. A very brief introduction to causes of trauma. So, before we end this session, I think it's important we ask the question, what is trauma? So, of course, during this research, I also studied what is trauma in all definitions. And I must tell you that I was disappointed. I was truly disappointed. Why? If you look at this is DSM-5. Psychotherapists know that we have a book called Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. This is like the Bible of the psychotherapists. We have to study this almost by heart so that we can remember all the diagnostic criteria when we work with a client, especially make a diagnosis, pathologizing. And DSM-5 says trauma is exposed to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence, either through direct experience, witnessing the event, learning that it occurred to a close family member or friend, or repeated or extreme exposure to adverse details of such events. Now we are starting to notice how about the deprivation? It was not comprehensively covered here. It was almost like DSM-5 ignored this. DSM-5 means the fifth edition, and this edition was done recently. And we know a lot about trauma, but DSM-5 decided not to include it. And not that different ICD-11. ICD, International Classification of Diseases, which is the Bible for the medical doctors and also mental health care professionals like psychotherapists. They also say it's extremely threatening or horrific events with psychological responses that may include fear, helplessness, or horror, and can lead to lasting disturbances in functioning. Once again, now you see why I wasn't satisfied when I looked at these clinical definitions. ICD-11 is a clinical definition. DSM-5 is a clinical definition, and they are blind to some of the areas. So there you are. That's the reality of the world that we live in. So, of course, when I see a gap, I create the solution. Therefore, I grounded this framework with a definition. I thought trauma is what happens when an experience or ongoing condition overwhelms a person's nervous system, leaving them unable to feel safe, supported, or regulated, and forcing the body and mind to adapt in ways that prioritizes survival over growth. This is what it made sense to me. The more I researched about trauma, what made sense most to me is this definition. Not in any way final, but I would like to share humbly my definition of what is trauma. Why trauma-informed coaching? Now we know that limited operations. Moving forward, most adults carry some level of unresolved trauma. Now we know that 70% of the population, world population, is estimated to having experienced a traumatic experience in their lifetime. Trauma shapes behavior before cognition. When little children experience trauma, they haven't yet developed cognition. So it's already incorporated, embedded in their nervous system. They don't have yet words. They do not have yet concepts. They do not have grammar. They cannot use the motor control to speak yet. So before cognition, before making meaning reasoning, the trauma shapes our behavior. And that's why something simple like something serious like a parent not providing the care to a child is directly resulting in the success fulfillment of an individual in the future. Without trauma awareness, coaching can unintentionally re-traumatize. And trauma-informed coaching protects ethical boundaries. It was so interesting to me when I started working with creating this framework, started offering this training. Some people accused me saying that I'm crossing clinical boundaries. I'm teaching coaches to cross boundaries. And I was really very surprised by that. It's not really crossing a clinical boundary. It's understanding the boundary that we don't have a clear understanding about. And it leads us to not cross clinical boundaries. When we are wearing the blindfold, when we are unaware about trauma, that is when we cross the boundary, not when we are educated. It's like ocean is a resource, but ocean can also be very dangerous if we approach it with no precaution. Trauma science is exactly like that. If we engage with it without knowing, then we are going to create more harm, more danger. But when we want to engage with this beautiful resource, which is ocean, we learn about ocean. We create ways to work with it, to engage with it. So we do the same thing with trauma. It enables us to reduce harm. And it enables you to collaborate with clinicians, provide the right client care, and create the right success outcomes rather than believing in that coaching can solve some problems. And now you notice, because you are able to approach the client's past, trauma-informed coaching is integrative of past without crossing clinical boundaries of psychotherapy. It is integrative. It enables us to do what we wanted to do when we first wanted to do coaching. No one of you came to coaching and said, before you started beginning your coaching training, no one of you told, oh, I only want to work with clients present and to the future. I don't want to be holistic. I don't want to be integrative. No, you wanted to be. But then you went through the coach education and you learned, oh, I cannot be. You realized that you were limited. So therefore, here we are. There's a trauma-informed coaching competency framework. If you're well educated, if you have experienced it, received feedback, supervision, then you're able to incorporate the past of the client without crossing clinical boundaries. Enable the client to acutely regulate themselves. Many coaching themes are trauma adjacent. For an example, what the few examples I shared with you. And another interesting thing is that it shifts our narrative. Coaching is reflective and goal oriented. Goal oriented, not goal achieving. Here's a huge difference. Coaching is reflective and goal oriented. But I hear many new coaches mistake goal orientation to goal achievement. So when they coach, the client must achieve goals. It's almost like that's how they validate themselves. But the moment we do that, we are harming our clients. Coaching is goal oriented, but it's about understanding and acceptance, not about goal achievement. And when we become trauma informed, it goes through the roof, our understanding of acceptance rather than goal achievement. It supports nervous system literacy because there's psychoeducation component. You're enabling the client to regulate, they become more aware. There's a learning component to trauma-informed coaching. And all coaching demands awareness of coaching. All coaching demands awareness of trauma-informed coaching. In this case, what I mean is that if you think, I am an executive coach, I am a sales coach, I am a business coach, I am a leadership coach, I do not need trauma. Wrong statement. As I continue this lecture series, I'm going to provide you with plenty of examples of how in executive coaching, leadership coaching, we just don't hear trauma because we simply don't know what to listen to. I always say in these sessions, what you don't know, you don't know. So this framework gives us a way of incorporating client holistically in a safe, ethical way so that we can magnify that transformation we offer to our clients. Yes. And so with that, I hope this session today invites you to recognize how trauma informs love and and to recognize trauma as human experience. You do not have to believe my word. Read through the research, do your own research, speculate, learn, reflect, and see if what I'm sharing here makes sense. So the 9th March next month, same time, we will be discussing the next topic, the second lecture, how the unconscious whispers of the past quietly and hold us back from our fullest life. In other words, understanding how trauma responses and neurobiological patterns shape our lives, relationships, success, and our inner peace. So, with that, thank you very much, colleagues, for engaging with me